Tabletopped will start after the following messages.
Are you looking for something comfortable to wear and keep your brain warm while playing tabletop games? Daily Dose of Yarn makes handmade, customized beanies for all of your style and comfort needs. She can even help you with a custom beanie to represent your favorite character. Check out Daily Dose of Yarn on Instagram and Etsy to order your new favorite beanie today.
Hey, I'm Brando.
And I'm Owen.
And we're the hosts of Banter and Such.
Each week we get together with the most interesting people that we know and talk about the things that we're generally interested in.
Like movies.
TV shows.
Movies.
Nostalgic childhood franchises.
Movies.
Urban legends.
And sometimes movies.
So check out Banter and Such anywhere you get podcasts.
Banter, ampersand, such.
Or banter and then the word and then such.
Or just banter and it fills in the rest automatically for you and you just click on it.
Either way, it's called Banter and Such.
Want to get into some BS with us?
Hi, excursionist. I'm Nari. Why don't you join me at the Into the Night Anthology podcast? Bring a friend along when you find us on your favorite podcast directory, and make sure to follow us on Twitter at Into the Night Pod so you never miss an episode. Remember, you should never wander these twisted paths alone. In fact, look, the first path is just ahead. Are you ready? Follow me.
Welcome back to Tabletopped, everyone. Nick, your host here, and today I have some really special guests joining me. Brandon Jacobs and Owen Landsberg are co-hosts of the incredibly funny Banter and Such podcast, where they talk about movies, culture, and all things nerdy. Owen, you kind of reached out and you said, like, hey, I'm a dungeon master. I love the show. I want to come on. I want to talk about this. Yeah. So why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about your D&D history.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Owen Landsberg. I am the dungeon master of the group. We'll just start there. I have been playing D&D for probably 18 years. So I started around 3rd edition of D&D and absolutely fell in love with it, just being a huge nerd my entire life.
Yeah.
So it's just something that I had to branch into. And about 2 years into playing it, I realized I like dungeon mastering more. So I've been kind of more of the professional D&D side of things, on the dungeon master side is what I should say.
The professional side, where the real players play.
On the dungeon master side, you peasants. You think you know D&D? You're only a player. Excuse me.
Yeah, come on. You don't even plan out sessions.
Oh, you just have to write it one single character backstory? I have to write an entire world.
Are you fucking kidding me? This is only 1 page long. Yeah, no, totally.
So hard. To the point where even Brando and I, we used to run a podcast called Hammered in Helios, which was a whole entire world that I had created and dungeon mastered for. But not a whole lot of people know this, but running a D&D podcast, like an actual play podcast, takes so much time editing, and I just didn't have the bandwidth to do it.
Yeah, for sure. One of the reasons why I was like, I love D&D, I love talking about D&D, I really want to do an D&D interview podcast, was because a actual play podcast takes about 1,000 times longer to edit.
Yes. Can confirm.
And Brandon, you are a little bit newer to D&D, but are just coming in. So, how did you sort of enter in the hobby? Was it through the Hammered in Helios podcast, or was it something else, or?
No, I think it was probably through Stranger Things and stuff, kind of when a lot of other people were finding out about it. And it was kind of the last piece of nerdism that I got into, because I've always been a Star Trek fan. I've always been to comic books and science fiction, fantasy, and all that stuff. But I just never played D&D until I was a full-on adult. Yeah. And then finally I was like, man, I want to do this. And I got... a friend of mine was playing, and I was looking for it. I was like, if anyone mentions this, I'm going to jump on it.
Yeah.
And my friend had mentioned, it was like, can I play? Can I play?
Please, please.
I was that desperate guy. I was like, please let me join. Can I be your friend? And it was amazing. Like the for me, like, because I'm a writer also on the side, and like I love the characters, I love the narrative, I love all of the interactive stuff. I could almost do a whole campaign without any combat.
Yeah.
But
by himself. He can do a whole campaign by himself.
Well, that's called writing.
Yeah.
That's
Is that what it is?
So we have Owen that's like, I'm the person who's writing the story here, and Brandon's like, yeah, I love the campaign as long as I just don't have to talk to anybody.
Wow.
No,
he's already got us pegged.
Gotcha.
I'm just gonna show up with this like weird character and try to mess up Owen's plans. That's my goal.
100%. That's what he does.
What's funny is I started. So I've been doing it for a few years now, and we just started playing kind of like a custom D&D game with my wife and my 2 little daughters.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I have like an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, and so I started DMing for them.
Yeah.
And so we've been doing that together as a family. That's called, it's on one of our shows. It's called Swords and Unicorns.
Oh, that's amazing.
And
yeah, Swords and Unicorns is awesome.
it perfectly describes the dichotomy of his 2 daughters.
Yeah.
Because one of them is just all about the role play, loves being into it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one just wants to murder everything.
Yeah, totally.
Like perfect definition of murder hobo.
Yeah, it's like equal parts rainbows and gore.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's like such a common entry path, the sort of like, I'm just going to unleash my full id on the table. Like, my first character was Bill Stabums, and he was named after what he does best.
And is that stabbing them?
Yeah, so like he's a rogue and he was a thief, totally not min-maxed or whatever. I was just fucking around, and I was also like so my kind of entry point to D&D was that I really loved like the Penny Arcade actual plays in high school, like way back, and I was just trying to get anybody to play with me. And everyone was like, that's a nerdy thing to do. So no one really wanted to do it. Finally, I like kept kind of like, I was aware of the hobby, kind of super interested in it, trying to play. But then after college, I really like dived in. So Brandon, I like totally understand the sort of like getting into it as an adult and having that sort of like weird, like, oh, I'm in this now. I love this. This is weird. And at first I was like pretty, like I had internalized a lot of that, this is a nerd thing to do, all of you, like this is stupid kind of thing. And so Bill Stabums literally, like I would say, Bill does this, Bill does that. And then slowly I got more and more into it and less like embarrassed or self-conscious. And so Bill just started talking about himself in the third person. And then eventually it just became, I do this, I do that. So like, I totally get it.
Oh yeah.
And that's one of the great things about character development.
Exactly.
And
kind of
role-playing.
speaking of that is sort of what I wanted to talk about with you guys today, which was engaging new players, engaging players in general. So Owen, as a DM, you probably think about this a lot. And Brandon, as a new player, you probably felt a lot of this and kind of know what works, what doesn't. And also as a DM for your daughters now, you probably are like, you're like altitude training, where it's like you have these 2 little like humans who don't give a shit about your feelings.
No, they're
or
full
my
on
campaign.
They're
or
full
my
on goblins.
preparation.
They're just goblins. They're just fucking shit up.
Amazing. Yeah. So you guys, I'm so excited to like hear your perspectives. So just to get us started, what do you think? Like, Brandon, you said that really story got you in. What was the thing that really like first like got you to lean into the campaign and get you really hooked and interested?
I liked like my character that I brought, and I had all these grand ideas for my character and all the possibilities that can happen. And like, I was just looking for an opportunity for my character to show, to showcase and be the star, and so really it was like the just the role play stuff. But the more you get into that, the more like you evolve in ways that I wasn't expecting, or I'd come across Owen's characters or some NPC that I'm like, well, this is really interesting. I just like playing off of this guy, and so just any interaction with other NPCs, and then eventually our group. I mean, because when everyone really gets into it and we're talking to each other, as characters. In character, and like we're making plans, because we had that moment, you have that moment where like you're strategizing on how to do this thing, on how to attack this group or whatever, and like you're doing it as if you were playing like a table, like a board game, like Monopoly or something.
Like a war game,
Yeah, and we're talking to each other like as ourselves, but then like when you've noticed, oh, I've been talking to you as my character, and so have you, and it's like, oh, this is cool. Like
this is crazy. I love we're being crazy together. Yeah, that's amazing.
As a DM, that is why I dungeon master. That's where like I get my pants just get really tight, if you know what I mean. is when I set up a situation and I'm watching my table and I'm no longer watching like my best friends. Yeah. I am now watching them actually as their characters, and I can just like step back and don't have to say a word for like 20 minutes, and I just get to like observe, and that is my favorite thing. That's why I dungeon master.
Yeah,
well, it's like that moment right there.
Yeah, speaking of that, Owen, like I totally resonate with that, because I think I played D&D for a while before I actually game mastered a Powered by the Apocalypse game, a Monster of the Week game.
Oh shit.
It ran for a year. It was like the best like RPG experience I've had. And it really got me into what you just said of like, there is something hugely rewarding about setting something up and watching everyone just fall in love with the story that they're telling together. It's like one of the best experiences that you can have. And I just wanted to ask you, like, when you are setting up these sort of things, how do you go about that? Because there's a lot of different ways to dungeon master. There's a lot of ways to run a TTRPG. Some of them I really disagree with, but that's just my personal style. Yeah. And I know, especially with new players, it's sort of like it's hard to get someone to completely buy in if they're not already a storyteller kind of person. So like, what ways do you approach getting a new person in or getting somebody invested in a game?
Yeah, I mean, so my first thing, and I don't think a lot of dungeon masters think about this, is D&D or just pretty much any tabletop RPG is really hard to get into. Just because there's just so many mechanics, and having to know like, okay, well, what's the difference between strength and dex, and how does it affect this skill? What's my hit points? All the classes, races, how things work, all can be so complicated for a new person of any age or any intelligence. Right?
This is a great point, because like, and a little bit to where Brandon said at the very beginning, like if you... I read this article that was saying how a bunch of like kind of gatekeepery dungeon master people were like really mad at actual plays because they don't follow the rules. And I think it's because the most exciting, fun part about these games is telling stories with your friends and being together in the banter and just like having that fun.
Oh,
and
yes.
the rules sort of drop away a little bit. Like Brandon, like you were saying, the role playing, I could do a full game of just role playing. Honestly, that's not really Dungeons and Dragons. Like that's something, this is like storytelling with your friends, right?
Yeah.
And so going back to what you were saying, Owen, I totally agree that it can be pretty tough.
Yeah, so you as a dungeon master, the first step to get a player engaged is to make it as easy as possible for them to sit down at the table for their first session. So most of the time when I'm talking with a new person, I don't show them the player's handbook or anything like that. I just go, hey, think of like your favorite movie and like your favorite character. I mean, like I always say like Lord of the Rings because that's pretty simple, but like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, any Marvel character, I'm like, if you could be somebody, what would you want to be? And if someone goes, hey, like I really like Scarlet Witch, I'm like, cool. Well, then we can talk about having you be like a sorcerer or a wizard or a warlock, like if that's what you kind of like. And then like class and race and all that stuff, and just kind of start to ask those questions to bridge that gap.
That's a really interesting way to do it. Essentially saying like, what archetype in our culture do you find yourself drawn to? And if they're like naming, like you said, like spellcaster to like help them out with that. Yeah, that's a really smart way of
or if they go
that.
Judge Dredd, I'm like, cool, you want to go paladin, let's go. Like, you know, just straight fuck shit up paladin.
You know, I've never thought of Judge Dredd as a paladin.
Oh, he 100% is a paladin.
I am the law. I am the law.
I mean, in like 4th edition, he's just like throwing Oath of Enmities around.
Oh my god, yeah. I mean, you want to say Dredd would be like a lawful good paladin, right? But he's just straight Oath of Vengeance if you're talking 5th edition.
I don't even think he's lawful good. I think he's just lawful neutral.
Yeah,
like, doesn't matter. We're following the law. Everyone, I'm going to fucking kill you if you don't.
I mean, that's kind of more on the lawful evil side. But you
know,
know,
pretty much.
This is not an episode about how amazing the Dredd movies and comic books are.
So it could be.
It could be. I'm down. I was just talking about Dread, the Carl Urban Dread movie with a buddy yesterday.
Dude, those are so good.
It's so good.
Hey, we have a movie podcast because we do this. Because we do this all the time. It's like, let's talk about that movie.
So to get back on track, what I do though is a moment a player sits down, I immediately just have the character sheet ready for them.
Yeah.
I let them to have ownership. You know, like I said, like they kind of basically come up with a race and class, but like I'm like, hey, like what's your name?
Yep.
How old are you? The height? What do you look like? So they have ownership in it. So it's not just like a bland character to them. But with all the rules and everything, I just have everything sit down. Because if you try to get a new player to sit down at the table and go, hey, for the first 3 hours, I'm just going to basically like verbal spew at you rules and all this shit, you're immediately turning them off. So I would say for sure, first thing you got to do is make sure that for word you use, gatekeeping. The gatekeeping is as minimal as possible for the player.
Yeah, I mean, I've even seen some folks, and I really suggest this too, of like when, like you said, build out that character sheet for them. And then I've even seen people highlight the main skills that they want to use. So, because like skill checks is just a list of like numbers and it can be confusing. So just, highlighting the ones that they're going to want to focus on and like having the specific numbers that they want to look at a little bit more really brought to their attention. And then what do you guys, both of you, since Brandon, you just went through this and Owen, you have DM'd for a bunch of folks. How do you go about telling them about backstory? Do you essentially tell them like, hey, write a 1-paragraph thing for your first character? We're going to take this super light. Do you say, don't prepare anything? We're going to figure out who this person is as we go. Like, what is your kind of style?
Hey, Brandon, do you want to tell our story of Croft's backstory?
Yeah, or really any of my characters' backstories.
This is what I love and hate about Brando as a player. Is go ahead, tell your one-sided story.
Just pages of backstory. Well, I love that. I love when a player comes to the table with like at least an idea of like who I am and what do I want. And like we talked about archetypes, and not just archetypes in the sense of like class mechanics, but also archetypes in the sense of like storytelling archetypes. Like what kind of character archetype am I? Like am I going to be like more like the caregiver? Am I going to be more like a mentor, more like the outsider, outlaw, or whatever? And when that personality and the danger of that is that, and I think that I fell into it early, is like I have like too much of an idea of who I am and what I want to be.
100%.
And
it's such an easy trap to fall into, man. Like you're not the only one.
The first time he sat down at my table to play D&D, we had been friends for a while, but he eventually was like, hey, like we just need you to start dungeon mastering for us because his old group fell apart. I was like, okay. He wrote a whole backstory, and I'm not kidding you, is what, like 4 to 6 pages long of 10-point font, single space, no paragraphs.
it was formatted.
And so he shows up at the table and he's like, hey, what do you think of my backstory? I'm like, I didn't read it. He's like, wait, really? I'm like, no, I'm going to have you condense this down into 2 paragraphs of everything that I as a dungeon master need to know.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference is like I learned that here's what I need to know. Like when I sit down at the table, I have things about who I am. Like I'll have like, personality things and notes of who I am to help me remember who I am to be in character. But what the DM needs is a lot less than that, or maybe like a few key points of saying, hey, here's like a backstory idea. You can use that if you want. Have this kind of open-ended thing. And the biggest thing for me though was adapting to the group dynamic. Because I came to this table with this idea of who my character is, but once we start interacting and I realize, oh, this is who I am in this group. I'm this guy of the group.
And it can be completely different than who you thought you were going to be.
Oh, yeah.
1,000%.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think I was fortunate because I've had experiences like I probably would have been like, I would have held on to that too tightly. But luckily I've been in some good groups with good players who are just really witty and really fun and really funny and like really open. And I'm like, you know what? I'm having too much fun to resist what's happening right now. Like this isn't where I thought I would be going, but I'm going to go this way because this is just a blast,
Totally.
And that's one of the things I tell my players too, especially new players. I'm like, hey, look, you see where the story is going, like the plot hooks.
Yeah.
Like, hey, if this session is we're all going to this cave to go kill a bunch of witches or hags, whatever you want, right? Gelatinous cube. There we go. Let's keep it super nerdy. Gelatinous cube. And you decide your character doesn't want to do that. I'm like, I'm sorry, as a DM, your character gets left behind. I'm like, I'm not going to sit here and run 2 different storylines for you. So I'm like, as a player, it is also your job to be involved. And find a way to say yes to the story. And if you're reluctant and you want to be vocal about it, great, because that's role playing right there. But at least you're going to be vocal and reluctant about it with the group in whatever the setting is that we're doing for the session.
Yeah, and that's the common thing, right? Is like everyone likes to play that Wolverine character, like that outlaw lone wolf character, and that's a fun character to play. But
can I also say it is everyone's instinct to make that character be their first character, and it is the worst character that you can ever be for the first character. It is not
10,000%.
fun to play unless you're like really good at like role playing and very familiar with stuff, because often you're just gonna be like grumbling in the background, not doing anything, and everyone's gonna be like, man, this guy kind of sucks.
The amount of times that characters come to the table and it's like, I want to be an elf ranger that's like forsaken his bloodline. I'm like, so you want to be Dritz? Is that who you're trying to tell me? Like, who? I was like, oh,
his name is Larry Stew. Yeah, I think that like for me, the biggest thing that I had to learn is backstory wise is that I would always want to really flesh out and I think this is also another thing for the beginner person. Like when I first wrote my character, I wrote a really tragic, like long backstory, and it was like this whole sort of like adventure that had already happened. And then my DM was like, and you're level 1 in this farming village? Like, what has happened to this person?
See, my flaw was I did that same thing with this like huge tragic backstory.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is so cool. The problem was none of the other players cared about that. Like, this is my tragic backstory and my character cares about this. But then when we were actually playing the game, like no one cared about it. And so like I was kind of disappointed at first, but then I had to think like you have to look for a way to make it interesting and fun, for other, because they don't necessarily care about like my wife who died 10 years ago, in game, and unless like I would talk to the DM at the time and say like, hey, how can I make this more interesting? Like, is there a way we can incorporate some of this stuff into the story? And I would always like ask questions, and I leave it up to the DM, because I think it's the DM's discretion is like how much to involve a character's backstory in their campaign.
Yeah, a great point that this is actually my next question for you guys was, so like one thing that I like to do is sort of rotate the spotlight of which character an adventure is sort of like highlighting, essentially. Not saying that the other characters are not, important to the story, but if I'm, mid-campaign and we need to start progressing a storyline that has been brought up by somebody and like has continuously, this player has expressed interest in this part of their character, right? Then I will develop a story that kind of centers around that issue that the whole table can talk about. And then we like after that, it's not like, okay, we're only going to talk about this for 10 years. We like move on very quickly to another character, and so everyone feels like they have that time as the main character, so it actually feels a lot more ensemble, so everyone feels important. But like, what do you guys do to really make sure that somebody's ideas gets brought into a campaign, especially for children, Brandon? Like how do you sort of like invest them in their story ideas, because ultimately it is collaborative, and how do you move that forward?
Well, I think the big part of it is, I think, as a DM, you have to be willing to incorporate some of your characters' backstories into your campaign, because that is just so exciting, especially for kids, because they don't see it coming. You know what I mean? They're like, oh my gosh, that was my, and you kind of look at like with my daughters, they kind of tell me their character, which they're essentially playing themselves. When you're like 8 years old and 10 years old, you're playing yourself like personality wise. But my one daughter's like a half elf druid, and we're like, okay, well, why are you a half elf and living in this area that's not known for that's just primarily human area? And she's like, oh, I don't know. And so like any way that I can incorporate that in and make that as part of because I have like the general outline of like where I want to go with a story.
Totally, yeah.
But if there's like, man, how can I plug this in? It's like, oh, now this person is related to you, or and if we have to, I might let them know ahead of time, like, or might sit down with them ahead of time and say, like, hey, who was your mentor, or who was your father and mother, or whatever, if you need to, and that way we're on the same page. I wouldn't want to just say like, oh, these are your parents, and because they're like, no, they're not my parents.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Well, I was just going to say that, like, I think the biggest thing that I've been really cognizant of lately is that the only thing that can make a player, in my experience, really lean out and disconnect from a story is when the DM's idea of what a character's story or who a character is dissonant from what the player thinks that character is. And then when they try to, like, impose those on the same story, there's, like, it just doesn't work, and the character feels like, I don't, or the player feels like, this doesn't feel right. And I feel like that's the way to make somebody lean out the fastest. So I think that's so right of, okay, like, what do you think about this? And then start building that into the story so it matches,
Well, yeah, I mean, plus I think, we're playing with cliches. Also, a lot of these archetypes, there's a lot of cliche in the archetype, like with the tragic backstory and, oh, it turns out they weren't really dead. In some of these, we all know where this is going. When we sit down to watch a movie, we know where this is going. Part of the fun is experiencing it, though, and seeing how it plays out and see how it's a part of the world and the campaign at large. And I think that's okay. I think some of that is like being willing to be open and saying like, okay, where do you want your character to go, or what are some ideas that you have about your character? It's kind of like we know where we're going with this sometimes, not all the time.
Right.
Yeah. And that's okay too. Not everything needs to be a surprise. And sometimes there are surprises, and that's exciting too.
You got to keep subvert expectations when you can, but as well, like, there's a reason why there are those key elements that you see in every single storyline.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like the student. The master dies and the student has to like overcome the evil guy, but you realize that the master was actually the evil guy all along. Like that's a typical storyline, but you can have fun with it. But there's a reason why it makes fun.
We did that exact thing in Hammered and Healers. Like I had a mentor character and I was like a previously evil character, and now I was a good guy.
He was an assassin. He basically was like the John Wick. He was an assassin that left the organization to start a normal life.
I was the Wolverine loner guy, right? But like, but I knew that Owen was gonna bring back my mentor, and I was gonna have a showdown with him, and we were gonna have some kind of. I knew that was gonna happen at some point. But here's the thing: every single day that I came in and sat down, I didn't know if it was going to be today, Yeah. And as something plays out, I'd be like, oh crap, is this it? Is it happening now? And then it would go a different direction.
I would tease it every session, and it would never happen. And so
when it finally did, though, I have to tell you, dude, my heart was racing, man. I was like, this is it, man. Yeah. I've dreamed about this. Like, I have ideas of what I want to say. And then the way it played out just went in all kinds of different ways. And it's like, that was awesome. Oh my gosh. It happened. It was awesome.
And that's one of the things that I really enjoy doing. One of my favorite part of being a dungeon master is I make fun of Brando about that like 6-page essay on his backstory. But I honestly did.
Well, you prefer that over like the guy who's coming cold turkey, don't you?
Not really, to be honest.
Oh, really?
Both are great because it depends on the player, right? The person that comes cold turkey could be a person that 100% wants to develop the character as they're role playing it. They want to go in not with any idea and see, kind of like how you were saying, Brando, with like, well, how does this character fit into the group and the storyline?
Yeah, just let it happen.
But like my thing I like to do, and Nick, you brought this up too, is like trying not to show light one single character, spotlight one single character too much. Or like Brando, you said as well, like no one gave a flying fuck about your character's backstory. So my favorite thing to do is try to interweave everybody's backstory together in some minor ways with the main story. So if you're dungeon mastering like a big epic campaign where there's the BBEG and the final session when everyone's level 20 is they finally get to fight the BBEG and die, a good way to keep the characters entertained and engaged is to make sure that their storylines are a part of the main plot in some way. So for instance, in like Brando's thing, he like he was saying, he's the John Wick ex-assassin character and whatnot. Like his organization was a part of like an evil side of things, and was like also with like one of the other characters who was an orc. Like his mentor was hired by the assassin and stuff like that. So if you can intertwine people's backstories together, even in the most minor way, it starts to get the players to actually care about each other's backstories a little bit, enough to where they'll start asking questions, and therefore then, like I was saying, like I have the moment where my table is now interacting with one another and asking questions, and it just makes it a lot more fun and engaging.
Well, a perfect example is like when we had, like a character from somebody else's backstory can be like a henchman or a lieutenant of a main bad guy, where you have your main bad guy, but it turns out, one of their main henchmen is related to my backstory. And it's like, that's cool. Like now I'm personally invested in the larger story.
Yeah, one thing that Powered by the Apocalypse and specifically Monster of the Week, but I think all of them do this in some way, is that when you do your character creation, you have each person ask a question of another person, and usually it's something like, how come you owe me a favor? Or something like that.
Yeah.
Like you get to entwine yourself with that other person from the jump, from like character creation, so that they are, a familiar face at the bookstore, or this person found this like artifact in your basement and they're like, why the fuck did you have this like magic lamp?
Dude, and there's a great tabletop RPG, Fantasy Flight does the Star Wars RPGs.
Yes.
And honestly, like, so as a DM, I have dungeon mastered game mastered, I should say, multiple different tabletops. And one of the things I try to do as well is incorporate things that I love from every single tabletop. And Fantasy Flight did a great job because they realized that in Star Wars, every single character you see comes at you not as a fresh character, but already has history.
Yeah.
So what they did is they used the example of like Han Solo, where Han Solo, when we meet him, already has a debt to be paid to Jabba the Hutt. We don't see it happen. It's just reference, and that's why he has to take the job from Luke and Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
And so what they do in the tabletop is they have you like figure out some type of debt, or whether it be like monetary, society, like a blood bond or whatever, to figure out like something that your character already has in his backstory, which I really enjoy. And that's something I always try to bring into every single tabletop that I run.
You should check out Urban Shadows. It's another really great TTRPG that uses the Powered by the Apocalypse system. In that one, the whole game is based around social debt. Yeah. So when something happens, you can actually incur a debt upon another player, an NPC, or you can start gathering debts from other people. You can trade debts, and they can actually be used in-game to like say, hey, you owe me from when I I patched up your wound in that gunfight. Yeah. You gotta let me into this club through the back door right now, and you have to ask no questions.
It's a currency to be used.
Yeah, it's literally currency that you can spend.
Cool.
And it's a really interesting mechanic. Definitely worth a read at the very least. But one thing I wanted to ask you guys too is that once you have sort of the game going, they've sat down, you've forced this person to sit down and take a chance on an RPG. You've given them sort of like a one-pager. They have their character sheet. What kind of story are you running? And Brandon, what kind of story would you suggest? Like what really brought you in, and what did you really enjoy doing when you were starting to get them hooked? Like what are you formatting that first adventure as? Is it a lot of combat? Is it just like RPing? Like what do you try to do to get these people to really get hooked?
Well, I try to have a little balance of kind of like the three main, you have like combat and role playing and exploring. And so when I sit down and write, especially the first one, I want to have a little bit of each if I can, as best I can, not to cram too much into it, but and to just see which one they gravitate more towards, because they might really lean into one and say, okay, well let's go in that direction. And what especially with Swords and Unicorns, I want something. Some of the oldies are the goodies. There's some things that are universal about storytelling that have been around for thousands of years. Like when with Swords and Unicorns, our first episode, it starts out, they're at a festival, and then all of a sudden the mayor comes out, there's a tragedy. Prissy, the purple prancing pony, which is everyone's favorite, was kidnapped.
Little Sebastian.
Yeah, essentially little Sebastian. It was kidnapped by gremlins by rat people, off into the woods. Who will go rescue Prissy the purple? And it's like, is that some brilliant new idea? No, of course not. It's the oldest thing in the book, but they had a blast doing it. So like as a game master myself, I wasn't trying to impress them with how smart I could be with my storytelling. I was just wanting to let's just get going. What is the easiest, simplest way to just get moving? And then once we're moving, I can see where they're going and what they're gravitating towards. And I'm like, okay, well, let's have more of that. And a big thing for them was like, I just want to make them the heroes, give them heroic moments. And I know we mentioned it earlier where we talked about the rules. And this is a funny thing because Owen, this is why I'm perpetually frustrating anyone. When I'm a character, I'm perpetually frustrating the DM. Is I'm definitely the guy where I'm like, the rules are just there if we need them. Like we don't have to follow them if we don't like them. You know, like whatever.
Dear audience, Owen is just shaking his head, like trying to like press the tension out of his forehead.
I get PTSD from all these moments. So Brando is an actor.
And I'm like, come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
Brando's an actor. He's not a combat guy in any way, shape, or form. So when we get into combat in Hammered and Helios, he would try to do the stupidest stuff and make it work. And I'm like, look, man, like I'm all about the
with the mechanics of the game.
Yeah.
Like
he's like, I want to jump off this like 80-foot building and land on the ground and like do this like diving attack on this guy.
That bad.
And I was like, okay, you realize you're gonna take like 66 falling damage. He's like, no, I'm gonna roll an acrobatics check. I was like, okay, yes, acrobatics check can lessen the damage, Brando. That does make sense, but you're still going to take some amount of damage because you're jumping off 80 feet.
Well, I mean,
let me say that your argument is not gonna find purchase with me. I am also an actor at heart, and Bill Stabham's like as a rogue and as a thief. All he would do, like we would meet especially towards the end of the campaign, we would just meet these giant monsters, and I'd be like, I'm gonna climb that motherfucker, and I'm gonna stab him as much as I can. And then the DM would be like, he just like slaps you and crushes you like a bug on his shoulder, and I'm like, but how can he even see me? I'm like a rogue, and I'm on the back. I'm stealthing, and he's like, no, you're on his body.
I love that, but I am also Brando. Do you remember one of the first things I said to you when we started playing D&D?
I don't
Anything
know.
you say and do can and will be used against you. So I am a very big yes and dungeon master.
Totally.
I want it, but as well, like I still need the players to have a fear of God in them a little bit. And like, by God I mean me. No, I'm kidding. But
I have to say, Brandon, I'm flip-flopping. I'm going to Owen's side. You gotta have consequences.
Well, and I don't disagree with him necessarily, but I'm more of a selective enforcement of the rules. Like, you know, with my girls, when they want to do something, like I want to set the standard or set the tone, and I might bring the rule hammer down on them and be like, okay, you try that, and then you fail, and now there are consequences to you failing, and they're like, oh, dang. But if you keep doing that, you're just going to discourage your players, you know, if they don't feel good, if they don't have that like 6 seconds of triumph. But that's why later on, you know, if they try something again, I might be, depending on like where we are in our session, depending on where we are, just how we're feeling in the night or in the day of playing, you know, I'm going to play loose with the rules, and I'm going to give you this moment, and you're not technically supposed to do this, but you do it, and I see them light up, and it's like, okay, I'm not going to let you do that always, but, you know, I kind of hand it out selectively, and I think with the rules, obviously, like, and Owen I need a DM like Owen to keep me, like, in some kind of boundaries.
Some shackles.
But you know, but that, and then, you know, just within some boundary, but within that boundary, I'm a big believer in, we got to have some kind of flexibility, because at the end of the day, we're just here to have fun, man. We're here to feel good, to have a good time.
I think especially for new players, like that first session has to be bonkers fun for them.
Yes.
Yeah.
You
for
definitely,
like a new player, like I've seen some DMs, like things were like in my first session, we were in this like kobold pit. Everyone was fucking dying, and all the rolls were going bad. And there was some light rule bending that allowed like me to use my lucky feat on somebody else's death roll so that they could re-roll and not just like completely, you know, TPK the party the first time kind of thing.
If Brando lived in the Avatar world, he would be a rule bender. That would be his bending right there, his rules.
That would be the Avatar. Yes.
But like Brandon brought up a good point too. For your first session when you're with players, like you can't just have an all combat session. Like you need it incorporate a little bit of everything. And we haven't talked about it, but every single player has like their own style. Like Nick and Brando, you both said it, like you guys are actors. Like you want the role play, you want to engage with your fellow players and the NPCs. That's your number one thing. And as a DM, you need to recognize like all the different archetypes and players. I think the DM's guide lists like 8 different archetypes. And there's like the actor, there is the explorer, which is someone that just wants to like see the world, and they're so obsessed with what you've written and whatnot. And then you have like, you got your combat guy. He just wants to murder everything. He's like, I don't care about this NPC or what we're doing.
He's like, I have a Warhammer game to get to later.
It's usually your barbarian, or your rogue. I would say those are usually the 2 that will go into it, where it's like, let me backstab. And that was another thing Brando always wanted to do as his character. Like, I want to backstab him. I'm like, you can't sneak attack him because there's rules to the sneak attack. He's like, no, I sneak attack him.
Well, I knew that whatever rule I didn't remember, Owen would remember it. So I was like, hey, can I do this?
So as a DM, like you need to be able to recognize, like, I would say for each player, like their top 3 fun things they like to do, right? So Brando is a actor first. He is an explorer second. And then I would say you're probably the watcher third, which is a watcher is just someone that's there for the social interaction, right? They're not really like so interested in the nuances of everything. They're just there because it's like, hey, I like hanging out with my buds and doing stuff, and I do enjoy this, but it's more about the social aspect for Brando.
And as a DM, you have to watchers are it can feel very strange running a game and one player is just sitting there watching, like just like kind of looking back and forth, not really adding anything. And then at the end they come up to you and you're like, oh shit, this person like hated the game. They had a terrible time. They're like, that was amazing. I had a really good time. See you next week. And you're like, what? What the fuck just happened? Like that's the first time I ever heard you speak.
And that's the thing is with watchers, you need to know that. And that is hard for me. One of the first times I DM'd, I had a buddy that just sat down and he just brought out his notepad and would draw something. The entire time he'd just work on something, which sucks, because you're like, am I not engaging? But like that was his way. He was a watcher, and this allowed him also with ADHD, allowed him to focus on drawing. But because his mind was focused on that, he could also focus on D&D. So like neurodivergent stuff,
Well, I think that's part of the appeal of these RPG games is that it really does allow so many different kinds of people with so many different kinds of interaction styles, like our personality styles. We're extroverts, we're introverts, we're this, we're that, and that's why these games are so great, is because there's room for everybody. Because across the table from me, I'm just hanging out, having a good time. I'm just like interacting as my character, and across the table from me, we got a guy who's like min-maxing all the numbers. He's like super cautious before he takes any action whatsoever, and it's like
I love destroying those people's days.
The power gamers.
There was a great moment where the whole group, and I've been playing with these guys for like 4 years, and they were like talking to this person who, let me say, the DM was making out to be like evil, but like lawful evil in a way that was like hard for us to confront directly. And I was like sitting on this like ship at like this cannon because we didn't know what was going to happen. And they all just start talking. They're like, what do we do? Like, should we do this? Should we do this? Like, maybe we should just leave her alone. Should we do this? And I was like, I fire the cannon. This is over. You had your time. You had the time to talk about it. We're going.
You're also the instigator. So you're actor first, instigator second.
I love that. I love the guy who kicks down the doors. And that's what makes a great group, is like we would see that dynamic play out, because the guy who's min-maxing the numbers, he's having a fun time too. That's how he has fun.
And he's gonna drag you bloody and almost destroyed through the dungeon safely. So they have their place. I'm just exactly. You have to have everyone.
He formed a plan. But he needed someone to go, okay, I just kicked the fucking door down, man.
Totally.
And that's in the group dynamic just works out. And I think like we as players, we need to be open-minded to each other, and like just like yes and each other, and say like, man, let's just you do you and I'll do me, and like let's do it together and see what happens.
Whoa, phrasing, Brando. Phrasing.
Yeah.
You
get
do
what I'm
me,
saying.
I do you. All of our keys
We're
in the
all
fishbowl at
doing
the
each
door.
other here at the table together.
D&D is not an orgy. I want to say that for the record. This isn't the 1980s anymore where everyone thinks we're getting together to do blood orgies.
Yeah, that's like way more Pathfinder these days.
But there is a nuance to that, right? Like, especially with an instigator. If you have that guy that's just, he's like, I just want to fucking kick down that door. I don't even care about a plan because it's going to fail anyways. So, like, let's just go. As a DM, you need to notice that. And at certain times, like I, as a dungeon master, the instigator has gone to proverbially kick down the door, fire the cannon, whatever you want it to, the situation is. I go, hold. I'm like, you can do this, but like these people are role playing right now. And I'll say it to the group in front of, I was like, let's 10 minutes. Like, let's have 10 minutes of role play. And if at the end of these 10 minutes, you like aren't like nothing's done, I'm like, go for it. And like most of the time the table goes, okay, cool. Which then the table now knows I have a 10-minute limit before I set the
flips the little timer.
The doomsday clock has 10 minutes left before the instigator does what he's about to do. And I'm pointing to the side of the table because that was Garrett, which was one of our players in Hammered and Helios. He was the instigator. He's like, let's just go.
But
but the thing is too is that so talking about new players and like engaging them, I would even just like a session 0 is super important, and also just talking to everyone, saying like, all right, everyone, these are like the basic kind of rules of the table when it comes to social interactions too, because like, I think that is such a smart way of saying like, hold on, that is, you're not denying that person their idea, but you're basically validating and saying like, hell yes. That is like basically what I picture in my mind is you are slowly walking over to the door. Everyone else, you have 10 minutes to figure this shit out if you don't want him to kick this down.
Yeah.
I think that can just liven up the table. And also I think that when dungeon masters start saying like, don't do that, that's stupid, that's wrong, that's like not optimal for what you're doing, I think that like kills like such a fun storytelling moment too, where you can just be like, hell yes, you're gonna go and like try to seduce this goblin, okay? But let me just tell you that this is going to be really hard. You're probably going to fail. And if you do, things are going to get bad really quickly.
But like, that is a prime example. So as a dungeon master, I would say too, to use that story is you cannot plan out everything. If you want your players to be engaged, you need to give them the freedom to make their choices. You can't, like, there are times that you need to put the story on railroads. Like it just needs to get there, right? But you need to allow that story to go off the rails sometimes for the player's sake, because that is a great story. Like, we were in a goblin's den. The leader, the queen, was lonely, and our bard decided just to try to seduce the queen. And either way that story goes makes for a memorable moment for the table.
Exactly.
For times that your players outside the table, when you're just like hanging out, grabbing a beer, would be like, dude, that was one of the funniest shits I have ever seen happen. Where it's like, dude, you took that goblin queen back and you ruined her. We heard her screams of joy.
Well, and that's what you have to keep in mind as the DM is, our goal is not to win the campaign. As a DM, our goal, and even as players, our goal is not to win. Our goal is to have fun. And sometimes failing is fun, and just letting your characters fail and just like, this is a terrible idea and I'm going to totally let you do this because that is a blast. That we had way more fun. And sometimes, especially for me as like the actor type guy, like I got like 4 other characters that I'm ready to go with right now. So I'm like tempting the DM. I'm like, dude, you kill me, man. I got two. You tempt
just
me.
Just try it.
Bring
I'll
out
be
another
back
character.
with a new, even more chaotic character.
I got an unlimited number of dudes who will kick down this door.
Unlimited annoying characters.
I have so many way worse voices to do.
Wow, I feel. Do we have two Brandos in this room right now?
You get me, Nick, dude. You get me.
It's like character he wants to do is this chef that has a Southern accent.
No, it's a New York accent.
Oh, it's a New York accent.
New York accent.
Your monk is a Southern accent.
My monk with a Southern accent. I base all my characters around just different accents I can try to do.
Which I love.
I think, okay, so I have a quick comment and then a final question that I kind of want to explore with you guys. Yeah. So I think that it's really important to, as we said, like, let your players have so much fun the first time, maybe bend the rules to let them like succeed where you won't usually succeed kind of thing, or like do something that maybe the rules don't technically allow, just so that they can really get hooked. I think that that's a great plan.
Yeah.
I would also say, like, show them how fun not succeeding can be.
Yes.
Like, I always am of the mind that if they get to a door and they try to lockpick it and it fails, instead of being like, your lockpick's broke and the door's still locked, I guess you have to go back to town and get a new set of lockpicks or whatever, just have it be like you like slowly, carefully unlock the door, you turn the knob and you open it, and the door has no, like, it's like super well oiled and flies open, slams into the other side, and you just hear an echoing boom go through the dungeon. Yeah. Like, just do that instead. It's like way easier, way more fun, and everyone's like, oh shit.
A forward moving failure. That like you're still getting the plot and you're not using that natural one to slow it down. You're still doing something kind of fun and wacky with it. Like the amount of times I've had it, like a barbarian swings his axe and he rolls a nat 1 on the attack. I'm like, the axe head comes off and goes flying off. Yeah. And they're like, oh, what do I got to do now? I'm like, you're the barbarian, figure it out.
And you have a bat now.
No, it's like, or you're going to start wrestling, or like I've had a barbarian then just run up to where like the axe head was like buried in a tree and then attempted to like use his hands and was like trying to like shove the axe head into people like that as a weapon. I was like, that created like funny moments.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And so that is a great kind of segue. So there can be these great like failure leading to these funny moments, but failure and kind of cross purposes can also lead to conflict at the table. So if you are a DM and have like a first time player or a group of first time players and they start having a little bit of conflict at the table, what is the best way, do you think, to like kind of mitigate that or make sure that at least it doesn't ruin the time for anyone? Because there's nothing worse than like a party just yelling at each other.
Yeah,
I'll take this one. Shots of Jägermeister really help. Just take a moment, do a shot. It doesn't have to be Jaeger. It could be whiskey, vodka if you're from Eastern Europe.
I was about to say, it's easy for me too on Swords and Unicorns because it's just my wife and my kids. So if someone's having conflict, I'm like, you're grounded if you don't shut up right now. If you keep poking your sister, we're going home.
But on a serious note, shots of Jaeger does work. No,
same with my girls. It's like, I'm giving you a shot.
We here at the Helios Network do not endorse underage drinking.
Just kidding.
But no, it's sometimes you got to let conflict play out just because it is interesting. But you, as a DM, start to need to notice when it is no longer conflict from character to character, and now the players are getting upset. And when there's times when you as a DM need to step in and it kind of sucks. But for the group's sake, you just need to put hey, I can tell this is starting to get a little too heated. Let's just move on. Screen wipe, Star Wars screen wipe across, and let's get to the next scene. And players can have issues with that because it doesn't feel resolved. I'm like, yeah, but this is a situation not about who's right. It's about the table and the story. And if we have an hour and a half left in this session, we haven't even started the final combat. Like we need to get to it and things like that. So you as a DM need to do that. And then afterwards, I'd always say, try to sit down with, if it's 2 of the players or it's the whole entire table, and like, hey, like let's air this out now outside of playtime, because it's already hard enough as adults to get 4 to 6 people together every week or every other week to play. So it's like you need to treat this as like sacred time. And have that be it.
Yeah, I think that for me too, because having people have conflict in character is totally fine. And I liked what you said about the Star Wars screen wipe. I always kind of default into essentially being a cameraman and start being like, this is what is happening on my end, so that I can start kind of pulling some of the steam out of it as well and turn it from a player thing into a character thing again if it starts drifting back, because conflict between characters can happen all the time. It's fine. It does happen a lot just because, we're telling a story. People don't agree all the time. But yeah, I think that the biggest problem, and if you've ever gone to any improv class ever, you'll know that people think that fighting scenes, like where people are fighting with each other, last 5 hours and they just start screaming, and then you get louder and louder and louder, and that's how you win that scene or whatever. Yeah. When everyone has to know, just for everyone's peace of mind and going forward, if you're in a fighting scene, you have to resolve it at some point. You have to switch from I have to be right to I have to get what I want, if that is, something else that maybe peripheral to how I thought I was going to win it. Because, otherwise you just start yelling at each other forever and it never ends well.
Yeah. And I mean, that's part of what we've been talking about. I mean, and really conflict resolution, even beyond just playing games together, just in life is, sitting down hey, do you have to be right now? Yeah. Or, is that your goal right now, is to be right? Or is it for us to have fun? Is your goal to do things your way? Or is it for us to have fun? Because it's okay if you're not right.
God, you're such a parent.
Okay. Yeah, I know. You're such a parent. and honestly, that's part of it. Just any other conflict resolution, sitting down is okay, why are you upset? Helping people articulate what is frustrating them. Saying what is making you upset. And that's one of the cool things about being a DM is you're kind of the neutral kind of referee. And you can bring resolution, help two people in conflict bring resolution where maybe they couldn't do that on their own. But you can say, hey, let's just sit down for a moment. Say, hey, why are you frustrated? Why are you upset? What is he doing that's causing this? And then hear him out. It's all right, cool. Can we agree to this? It's okay, we can. Cool. And then for the most part, then you go on, you have fun. There are people who maybe just they'll never get along, or there's just not everyone belongs on at every table. And that, I guess that's the really tough thing. I mean, each DM's got, it's up to them what call you make. If you're gonna sit someone down and pull push the red button, be look, you're just not gonna work out. But I also think that's okay as a DM. I wouldn't go to that right of way, but if you need to, it's also okay to say, hey, maybe you're just not the right fit for this group. I would try to do everything I could to make it work. But at some point you might, just say look, we're here to have a good time, and we want to do that. And that, I think, is the goal. If we can all agree on that, we're here to have fun together, then we can do it. And if not, then, we have to do something else, essentially.
And on that really wonderful note, thank you guys so much for coming on. Owen, Brandon, it was awesome. Can you kind of plug the stuff that you're working on? The Helios Network is so cool. Can you tell people a little bit about it? Tell them about yourselves, where they can find you, all that kind of stuff.
Definitely. So the main podcast that Brando and I do is called Banter and Such, and that is on the Helios Network, which is a network that we started here in Nashville, Tennessee, and it's just a podcasting network, which is super dope. Brando and I, you're the high prophet, and I'm the high overseer of the Helios Network, and
those are official titles.
Yes, it is, and it's literally just we know everybody has a book in them, and that's Brando's line, and I'm stealing it right now.
It's not my line,
but it's we're just give anybody and everybody a platform. So we have a bunch of different awesome podcasts that you can listen to on the Helios Network. So obviously, Banter and Such is ours. Nick, you gave us a great promo at the beginning, but it's just a nerd talk podcast. 99% of the time, we're talking about a movie, but it could be we've talked Dungeons and Dragons before, video games, conspiracy theories,
just any random stuff, which is mostly movies and shows. But we're on all the wherever you get podcasts, and of course, my show with my girls, Swords and Unicorns, is still ongoing. We're a newer one. We're also slow, like we said. There's a lot of editing involved, a lot of writing involved, and a lot of corralling kids involved. But at the end of the day, we end up with something really fun and funny, and I just love it. So
you can go to www.theheliosnetwork.com. Helios as in the Roman god of the sun. And that has a link to every single one of our podcasts that are up there, so you can check out a bunch of different fun ones.
And you can find us just anywhere you get podcasts. Banter, ampersand, such. Then you'll hear our voices. And you too, Nick, you're going to be on the show.
I will. And we're going to be talking about something near and dear to my heart that is not Dungeons and Dragons, but basically is Dungeons and Dragons, which is the Fast and the Furious series.
Yes.
How tangentially related is that? Wonderful.
And do you guys have any like socials or anything that people can follow you at? Or?
Yes. So we have the Helios Network on Instagram, Banter and Such podcast as well.
Yep.
Amazing.
And Swords and Unicorns.
And
I always forget that one.
All of them.
Yeah.
Which, if you are trying to get, like, if you're a family person and you have little ones and you want to get them into actual plays, it's a great one to start with. It's totally family friendly and very, very fun. So definitely check it out.
Yep.
Guys, thank you so much for coming on.
Dude, this has been awesome.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah, man.
We'll probably have you back sometime anyway, so we'll see you then.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
All right, see ya.
Bye.
Thank you all for listening to another episode of Tabletop. My name is Nick Perrin. I'm the host here. If you'd like to get in touch with any of us, including me, head to our website, tabletoppod.com. We have a contact form there that goes straight to our personal emails. And everyone, if you could do me a huge favor, if you enjoyed the episode, tell some folks. Go down into your podcast app and write a quick review. I will read any new review that comes in the new year. I promise. Feel free to use that for good or for evil. You can write literally anything, and I will just be forced to read it. So feel free to do that now. If you would also like to share the episode with some of your friends, it is the best way for the podcast to gain new community members. And if you are interested in supporting the show, we do have a Patreon, we have a Discord. All of these things are at our website. Again, that is tabletoppod.com. All right, everyone, I hope you have a wonderful week.